Now that we got our file saved, we can start coloring. That's the fun stuff. First thing I'm going to introduce you to before we get going with any color is introducing you to layers. Layers is an awesome thing, and if you didn't have layers, your world of digital art would be much, much harder. Use layers ubiquitously. For our, right now, by default, you always get one layer, and I think Photoshop always gives it the color background. And when you set up your document, you would set up what the background color would be. Sometimes this is a different color, sometimes this is transparent. In our case, it's white, and you'll also notice that it's locked. And that's fine, we're going to unlock it later. But we added art to our Photoshop file, and it automatically created a new layer for it. We can rename this layer in a couple different ways. First, we can come up to the layer window, and we can, let's see here, rename the layer. And then when I do that, you have to go all the way back down here, and you'll notice that the layer is highlighted in blue now, and you can type in a new thing. If I click away, it changes the editing. The other way I can do it is very carefully double click, not too fast. You have to click right on the text. If you're to the left or the right of it, you're going to get a different result, but you want to slightly double click till you see that highlighted, and I can now change that to line art. By default, the layer is normal, and when you take more advanced Photoshop classes, you'll learn what all of these other options are. For now, we're going to choose multiply. What essentially that does is the line art is now sort of see-through. That's probably the best way I can describe it. Right now it doesn't really change much, but you'll see here pretty soon how this works. Okay? Now we want to create a new layer that we're going to color on. And let's go ahead and create a new layer. A couple different ways to create a new layer. We can go to layer and create new and choose layer. That's one way. Almost always you can find what you need to do up here in the menu. Every once in a while you have to right click or use the tool. It just depends. But there's also down here at the bottom of the layers window, one of the little icons looks like a square with a cropped ear on the lower left corner. If you hover over it, there should be a help window that pops up and lets you know what's going to happen. And that's the one we want, create a new layer. Right next to it is delete a layer. So you'll notice that Photoshop, everything's really, really tiny. If you change the resolution of your computer, that'll change the size of the tools. So if these tools are too small for you or too big, you can go to your computer resolution and change the size. But Adobe is trying to give you as much workspace as it possibly can, so they've really tried to slimline all of the tools around on the periphery. Alright, so let's create that new layer, and as soon as I click it, it creates another layer 1. The little thumbnail in here gives you an indication of what's in that layer. You can you can see that this is all white, and you can kind of see there's black line art here, and then there's this checkerboard. That gray and white checkerboard means transparent. You'll get used to that eventually as you work with all of the Adobe tools. Let's go ahead and rename this one body, and now we're going to color the entire body of this dragon in one fell swoop. Now one way I could do it, I can zoom in again. Again, that's Command plus or Command minus. Another helpful tool is the space bar. When you're in the canvas area with the move tool selected, when you hold space bar, you get a hand, and now you can kind of move the art around. It's almost as if it was a piece of paper and you took your hand and could move it. That's the space bar. So that's a very useful shortcut tool as well. Otherwise, you can scroll with your mouse as well. You get these control scroll bars on the side and on the bottom, and that's another way you can move the positioning of where your art is. Now we could go and try to just color everything green, but we're going to show you a quick shortcut using the paint bucket tool. So first I need to select on the line art, and the reason why I'm doing that is because I want to select all of the space around this dragon. There's a tool up here called the magic wand tool. Now some people have different preferences. Some people like using the quick selection tool. Some people like the magic wand tool. I'm going to use the magic wand tool, but you'll learn more about all these tools later, so don't feel like you have to learn everything right now, and don't assume that this is always the only and best way to do it. It's just one way. So with this selected, you should see my cursor now looks like a little magic wand. Again, I have to make sure that I'm on the line art layer, and the way I know that is it's slightly highlighted. It's a lighter gray than the other layers. So I'm going to click in the space outside the line art, and as soon as I click it once, you'll start seeing the selection, and we call this the marching ants. Now I have to add to the selection because it didn't quite select everything I needed. You'll notice that there's space all around here, and that's probably because that's where the line art of the dragon ends. So I'm going to hold the shift key, and then you see a little tiny plus sign next to my magic wand. Really tiny, so I hope you have your video at full zoom to be able to see this. But I'm going to go ahead and click in that spot, and that adds to my selection. Alright, now keep the marching ants. Don't do any other clicking quite yet. There's a few other little tight spots that I'm going to get to. Alright, so I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to move this over. You'll notice that I also want this space selected as well because I don't want to color it in. So once again, I'm going to hold my shift key to get the plus, and I'm adding to that selection. So now I've got marching ants selecting this inside, I've got the outside. And if I'm really careful, you'll notice that there's a little spot right here in the mouth. I can zoom way in. By the way, as I'm zooming in, notice these squares. That's the resolution. That lets you, when we have raster art, and that's what raster means, is every square gets a designated color. If you zoom in, let's look in that real close. Notice how every square has a color assigned to it. And if you counted 72 of these across, that would be 1 inch. So that would be 72 resolution, DPI, dots per inch. If I made this 150, well, now the squares are going to be tinier, and there will be so tiny that there would be 150 in an inch. If I went all the way up to 300, really tiny. And the tinier they get, the more information it holds, and the more realistic the image is. That's essentially what raster art is, the term raster and DPI. Zoom out just a little bit. There's that space in the mouth. Let's go ahead and hit shift and click that as well. And that might have selected more than I wanted. If I get more than I wanted, hit Command Z and it returns you to right where you were before. There we go. Now I got it just that selected. So Command Z is one undo. And if you need more than one undo, talk to your instructor. You'll have to learn how to use the history palette. You can actually go over to the history and it records every click and keystrokes you made. Alright, so let's go back to layers. So what I've got now on the line art is everything selected. Now I want to switch back to body layer. Make sure body layer is highlighted. And now I'm going to inverse my selection. Right now I've got everything outside the dragon selected. Remember, we selected around it. Now I want to change that and just select what's inside the dragon. So we come up here to select inverse. There's also a shortcut for that if you ever want to learn that. As soon as I do that, now all the marching ants are in the same place, but now there aren't marching ants around the whole document. That's because now we have everything inside the dragon selected. So with the body, we're going to choose a color. And we'll come up here to my color window and choose the color tab if it's not already selected. Now when you get there, you might see different sliders here. To make sure we're working in RGB, there's a little hamburger menu to the right, and it lets you pick which sliders you want to use. We're going to change ours to RGB, red, green, and blue. And red, green, and blue is set in designations of 0 to 255. So if you have everything at 255, it's all white. And essentially white is all colors turned on. Black would be all of the colors turned off. And now we can adjust these sliders anywhere we want to make a full color spectrum. And you can just sit here and play with the sliders. Also, right below it, you might see this Prisma window. If not, and yours is too small, there's a way to actually grow or change the size of your window when you get to the edge, and then it gets a little bit bigger. Now you can sit here and select colors from inside that and look at how the color sliders move with your selection. Let's go with something kind of green. In fact, I'm going to go pretty stark contrast. We'll have a different lecture on color theory, and I'm going to go ahead and just go for ultimate contrast because I really want this to be really vivid. So I'm going to use extreme colors. The dragon's going to be, by the time this whole thing is done, it should have quite a bit of pop to it. You'll also notice that there's this color with an exclamation mark next to it. Eventually you're going to learn what CMYK is, and this is a warning that your color, your RGB color, is out of gamut. This color works on screens, but it isn't printed. It can't be printed on paper with regular 4-color printing, and that gives you just a warning. You'll learn more about that later, just in case you were curious. Thought I'd let you know. Alright, so I've got my colors selected. I've got this really vibrant green, and I'm on the body layer. I now come over to my tools, and about halfway down on my tool palette, there should be something that looks like a paint bucket. If you don't see that and you see a gradient tool instead here, you can just click on it, hold it, and then select the paint bucket tool. So in Photoshop, the gradient tool and the paint bucket tool share the same space on the toolbar, and you just have to know how to go in between it. So let's make sure this is set to paint bucket. And now the way I know that my paint bucket is going to color the green is down here. There is the swatch indicator, and the green is in the square in front. This one is a background color. That comes in later when we're going to do a gradient. For now, that really doesn't mean anything, but this does let us know we're going to paint the color green. So I got my paint bucket, I got the color green selected, I'm on the body layer. I hover in between the selection, and anywhere in there I just do a single click, and boom, everything is green. Alright. Now at this point I want to deselect the marching ants. So to do that, I come over here to select or deselect, and there's also a shortcut, Command D, and that's a pretty common one, so I'm just going to hit Command D. And now the marching ants are gone. Now you're probably wondering, well, that's what happened to the line art. Well, the line art is still there. It's below this body layer. Notice that there's an eye icon next to the layer. If I click on that, it hides the layer, everything that you put on that layer. At this point, the only thing on that layer is the green that we added. Each layer can be turned on and off. So the line art is still there, but we haven't messed with it because we actually painted on a different layer. That is the magic of Photoshop. So let's turn this back on, but what I want to do is move the body layer underneath the line art. So I just click, drag, and pull it down till I see that highlighted line, and then I let it go. And there you go. The body layer is now below the line art, and remember we had set the line art to multiply, which is sort of like a see-through layer. Now it blends the black with the green, and where there isn't black and it's just white, the white essentially becomes transparent and the color shows through. Pretty cool, huh? We've done a lot of work already. We're going to do a little bit more with the pencil tool and the airbrush tool. But let's go ahead and save this. Again, remember there's a little asterisk up here. When you see that asterisk, all of the changes you've made since the last save have not been saved yet. They're being stored in what's called RAM memory. I highly recommend that you save often as long as you like what you did. You can always go back to your history and change things that you've done in the past. But let's go ahead and hit Command Save, or you can go to File and hit Save here. So there's Save or Command S as the shortcut. Alright, in the next video we're going to talk about how to color with the pencil tool and the brush tool.